All right, C3, are you ready for this? We're going deep into Philippine law today, and specifically prescription.
Ah, yes,
This
prescription.
is basically how time passing can actually like shift ownership of things.
It really is kind of like a legal use it or lose it kind of situation.
Yeah, or even gain it, like you were
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, you can even gain ownership through time.
It's like a legal time machine. And
Yeah.
today we're going to be your guides to figure this all out. So we've got all these civil code excerpts here. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think the best place to start is always with the definition, and that is in Article 1106 of the Civil Code.
Okay.
It says, by prescription, one acquires ownership and other real rights through the lapse of time in the manner and under the conditions laid down by law.
Okay, so it's not just about time passing. There are like these specific rules we've got to meet.
Exactly.
This is already getting interesting. What are real rights besides like just straight up ownership?
Yeah, so think about things like easements, like having the right to use a pathway across your neighbor's land or the right to draw water from a shared well.
Okay.
Those are rights that you can acquire through prescription just like you would ownership.
So we're not just talking about like holding a thing. We're talking about rights related to property C3.
Mm.
Imagine you get the legal right to use your neighbor's pool just because you've been swimming in it for years.
Well, now hold on. It's not quite that simple. There are specific types of prescription and the requirements can be tricky. But yeah, the possibilities are there.
Okay, let's break it down though. What are the different types and how do they work?
All right, so we have two main categories.
Okay.
We've got acquisitive prescription
Okay.
and we have extinctive prescription.
Okay.
Acquisitive is about gaining rights through the passage of time,
Okay.
and extinctive is the opposite, losing rights if you don't act within a certain time frame.
So it's a two-way street. Time can work for or against you, depending on the situation. Let's say I find an abandoned bike and start using it all the time. Could I eventually claim ownership through prescription?
It's a great question, and it kind of brings us to the key ingredients for prescription to work.
Okay, lay it on me.
Whether we're talking about acquiring ownership of that bike or losing the right to collect an old debt, there are common elements required.
Okay, what are they? What are those key ingredients?
All right, first, you need capacity.
Okay.
So that means the person involved must be legally capable of acquiring or losing that, right?
Like you couldn't do it.
Exactly. A minor wouldn't have the capacity to acquire property through prescription.
Got it. What else?
You need an object,
Okay.
and that means something specific that can be subject to prescription, like the bicycle you mentioned, or a piece of land, or an intangible, right, like an easement.
So there's an actual thing at stake.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. What's next?
Of course, the most obvious ingredient, time. The law sets specific periods for different types of prescription. We'll get into that a little bit later.
Okay.
But finally, and probably the most crucial element, possession.
So it's not enough to just like know about something or have a vague claim on it. You need to actually possess it.
Exactly. And not just any kind of possession. The law requires possession that meets 4 specific characteristics.
Okay.
It must be in the concept of an owner, public, peaceful, and uninterrupted.
Okay, whoa, hold on. What does it mean to possess something in the concept of an owner?
Yeah, that's a great question. That means you're acting like you own it.
Okay.
You're not just borrowing it or using it with someone else's permission.
Yeah.
You're treating it as your own property, making decisions about its use, and potentially even investing in its upkeep.
This wording in Article 1118 really stands out to me. It says, and the concept of an owner, not just like a user or a borrower.
Yeah.
This seems really important.
It is very specific. The law is very specific about this. It's not enough to just simply hold on to something. You have to act like you own it. And this concept has been the basis of countless legal battles over property rights in the Philippines.
C3, can you imagine a courtroom showdown where it all comes down to whether or not someone was truly acting like they owned a property?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so what about those other characteristics of possession? Public, peaceful, and uninterrupted. What do those mean?
So public possession means your possession isn't hidden, it's not secretive, you're openly using and enjoying the property or exercising that, right? Letting the world know that you're in possession.
So no sneaking around in the dead of night.
Exactly. Peaceful possession means you didn't acquire it through force or violence.
Okay.
You obtained it without conflict or dispute.
Yeah.
And finally, uninterrupted possession means you've been consistently in possession for that required period without significant breaks or interruptions.
So you can't be like, oh, I possess it for 1 year and then I went away for 5 and I'm back. Now it's 6 years.
Exactly. You have to have that consistency.
Okay, got it. So
Yeah.
these 4 characteristics are like the cornerstones of possession.
Exactly. If any of those are missing, then the whole thing kind of crumbles.
This is already giving me a clearer picture of how prescription works,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm guessing there's more to it than just these basic ingredients.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've only just scratched the surface.
Wow.
Now we get into the difference between ordinary and extraordinary prescription.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. These two types have different rules and time frames.
Right.
It's like choosing between two paths to reach the same destination.
It is a great way to put it.
Okay.
Imagine ordinary and extraordinary prescription as two distinct routes on a map,
Okay.
each with its own challenges and advantages. Ordinary prescription is like the express lane.
Okay.
It's faster, but it requires meeting stricter conditions.
Okay.
Extraordinary prescription is the scenic route. It takes longer, but it's a little bit more flexible in terms of requirements.
So choosing between them is strategic. It's not just about how long you've had something. It's about whether you can meet those requirements. So let's dive into those details. What makes ordinary prescriptions so special? What are those stricter conditions?
Ordinary prescription, as defined in Article 1117, requires two key elements:
Okay.
possession in good faith and just title. Think of it as a two-pronged test. You need to demonstrate both to qualify for that express lane of prescription.
Okay, so two things. Good faith and just title.
Exactly.
Let's break those down. What does possession in good faith even mean?
All right, so Article 1127 says, the good faith of the possessor consists in the reasonable belief that the person from whom he received the thing was the owner thereof and could transmit his ownership.
So it's all about your state of mind when you got the property.
Yeah.
You genuinely believe that the person you got it from was the rightful owner.
Exactly. It's about acting honestly and reasonably.
Okay.
Without any knowledge of any flaws in the title or any reason to suspect that the person you're dealing with isn't the legitimate owner.
Yeah, this is making me think of all sorts of situations. Let's say you inherit land from your grandmother.
Okay.
You have no reason to doubt her ownership. She's always lived there. Everyone in the family considers it hers. But years later, someone pops up and claims they're the rightful heir.
Oh.
Were you acting in good faith when you inherited that property?
Most likely, yes.
Okay.
You had no reason to question your grandmother's ownership, and you acted based on the reasonable belief that she had the right to pass the land on to you. But
what if, like later, you find some old documents revealing a long-lost sibling who might have a claim?
ooh,
Does your good faith suddenly disappear? How does that impact your claim?
those are excellent questions. This is where the concept of good faith turning into bad faith comes in.
Okay.
The law acknowledges that circumstances can change, and what was once a reasonable belief may later be proven false.
So you find that document
Hey.
revealing this potential claim.
Mm-hmm.
Does that suddenly make you like a bad faith possessor? Like you're a villain in a legal drama?
Right. Not necessarily a villain, but it's more about the point at which you become aware of a potential flaw in your title.
Okay.
So once you have knowledge that your possession might be contested, the law expects you to act accordingly.
So it's about the knowledge, not necessarily some, like, evil intent.
Exactly.
Okay, how does that knowledge impact the timeline of prescription? Does the clock reset?
Not entirely. So for real property, like that land you inherited 3 years of possession in bad faith is considered equivalent to 1 year in good faith.
Oh, so it's almost like a penalty for losing that good faith status.
Right.
But you don't have to start from scratch.
Right. The law takes into account that it's not about punishing people for honest mistakes.
Right.
But it's about adjusting the timeline to reflect the changed circumstances.
Got it. This is so fascinating. We've covered good faith. But what about just title? What does that even mean?
So just title is all about the appearance of legality. It means you acquire the property or right through a legal process that on its face seemed valid and proper.
Like buying a car.
Exactly, like buying a car. You get a deed of sale, it's registered, everything seems official.
So you went through the motions, you got the paperwork, everything seems legit.
Right.
Does that mean that the title is always perfect?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
There could be hidden flaws. Maybe there's an unknown error or a forged signature or a boundary dispute that wasn't apparent at the time of purchase.
So even with a seemingly valid title, there's always a possibility of something lurking beneath the surface.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is where that concept of titulo Colorado comes in.
Okay, C3. Get ready for a legal curveball.
Right.
What is titulo Colorado?
So titulo Colorado refers to a title with some defect,
Okay.
like a missing signature, an error in the property description, or even just a questionable transfer of ownership. It's like a slightly flawed map. It might get you most of the way there, but there could be some discrepancies.
So it's not a completely invalid title, but one with some blemishes. How does titulo Colorado fit into this just title requirement.
So even with Titulo Colorado, you can still meet the just title requirement for ordinary prescription. The law recognizes that not all titles are perfect.
Right.
And as long as you acquired the property in good faith, believing the title to be valid, that Titulo Colorado can be sufficient.
So it's like having a slightly dented car.
Yeah.
It might not be pristine,
Yeah.
but it still gets you from point A to point B.
Exactly.
It seems like the law is trying to be practical
Right.
about these imperfect documents.
Absolutely. The Titulo Colorado concept is a testament to that flexibility and pragmatism of Philippine law, recognizing that real-life situations are rarely black and white.
This is making me rethink all my assumptions about property and time. But what about extraordinary prescription? What makes it so extraordinary?
So extraordinary prescription is less demanding in terms of requirements.
Yeah.
Unlike ordinary prescription, extraordinary prescription doesn't require good faith or just title.
Okay.
It's all about the length of time you've possessed the property, regardless of the circumstances surrounding your acquisition.
So we're not concerned with whether or not you were acting in good faith or had a valid title. It's all about time.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Extraordinary prescription is like a safety net for those who might not have the perfect paperwork or who might have acquired property under questionable circumstances.
So even if there are skeletons in the closet, if you've openly and continuously possessed a property for a long enough time, you might still be able to claim ownership through extraordinary prescription.
Exactly. And the time frame for extraordinary prescription is longer than for ordinary prescription, reflecting that it's a less stringent path.
Okay. This is making me think about those classic land disputes in the Philippines,
Right.
where families might have been like occupying a piece of land for generations, even without a clear title. Could they potentially claim ownership through extraordinary prescription, even if their initial possession wasn't totally by the book?
Yeah, that's a very real possibility. And we'll delve into some specific case examples that demonstrate how extraordinary prescription has played out in real-life situations. But first, let's clarify those specific timeframes for both ordinary and extraordinary prescription.
Okay.
We need to talk numbers.
All right, let's talk numbers. Okay,
Yeah.
so we've got these two paths. Ordinary prescription, like the express lane with the stricter requirements, and then extraordinary prescription, it's like the scenic route with a longer time frame.
Right.
Let's talk numbers. What are the actual time limits?
So for ordinary prescription to acquire ownership of immovable property like land, article verse, Article 1117 of the Civil Code says you need possession in good faith and with just title for 10 years.
10 years.
But if we're talking about movable property like that bicycle you mentioned, it's only 4 years.
10 years for land, 4 years for a bicycle.
Hmm.
I guess it's easier to keep track of a bicycle than like a big piece of property. What about extraordinary prescription? How long do you need to possess something for that?
So for extraordinary prescription, it's all about uninterrupted possession for 30 years.
30 years.
Article 1137 of the Civil Code states, ownership and other real rights over immovables also prescribed through uninterrupted adverse possession thereof for 30 years without need of title or of good faith.
Wow, 30 years. That's a serious commitment. Extraordinary prescription is truly for those who are in it for the long haul.
It really is. It's a testament to the idea that continued open possession, even without perfect paperwork, can eventually lead to legal ownership. It's like the law acknowledging the reality of how people sometimes acquire and use property over long periods.
This makes me wonder,
Yeah.
Are there any situations where prescription doesn't apply? Like, are there any rights that are just like too important to be lost or gained through time passing?
Absolutely. Article 1143 of the Civil Code lists a few. It says, the following rights among others specified elsewhere in this code are not extinguished by prescription. 1. To demand a right-of-way. 2. To bring an action to abate a public or private nuisance.
So even though time can shape ownership and erase debts, there are some fundamental rights that stand the test of time. You can't just like block off a public road and be like, oh, it's mine now, because you haven't used it in a while.
Right. Public access safety, the right to address nuisances, these things are considered too important to be subject to the whims of time.
Okay, so we've got the time frames for ordinary and extraordinary prescription. And we know there are certain rights that are immune to the effects of time. How does all this theory play out in real life? I want to hear some cases.
Oh, we have some really incredible cases that really showcase the power and complexity of prescription. Let's start with a classic family feud over land.
Okay.
C3 imagined two branches of a family, each claiming ownership of a valuable piece of property. Decades of bitterness, contested wills, legal maneuvering. It's like a telenovela.
Oh, I'm hooked already. How did prescription come into play?
Well, one branch of the family had been in possession of the property for over 30 years,
Oh.
openly using it, farming it, even building structures on it. They didn't have the strongest paperwork, but their possession was undeniable.
So they were relying on that 30-year rule for extraordinary prescription. That sounds risky with all that family drama.
It was, but the court actually ruled in their favor, emphasizing that their long and uninterrupted possession, regardless of the flaws in their title, was sufficient to establish ownership through extraordinary prescription.
So sometimes it's not about who has the better claim on paper, but who's actually been exercising ownership.
Exactly. The law seems to favor those who actively use and possess property, even if their paperwork isn't perfect.
That's a powerful reminder, C3. Imagine winning a property dispute based on decades of family history and use even without a perfect deed.
Right. It speaks to that fairness aspect of prescription. It rewards those who have openly and consistently exercised their rights regardless of technicalities.
That family feud was intense. Do you have any more cases?
All right, how about a case involving a sneaky land grab? Imagine a property owner living abroad, C3, completely unaware that someone has been encroaching on their land little by little, building structures and claiming ownership. Years go by before the owner returns and discovers this unwelcome surprise.
That's a nightmare for a property owner. How did prescription play a role in that?
Well, the encroacher argued that they had acquired ownership of that portion of the land through prescription, claiming they had been in open and continuous possession for over 10 years. They even had witnesses to back up their story.
So they're trying to use ordinary prescription, claiming good faith and just title. But how can they claim good faith if they knew they were encroaching?
That was the big question, and ultimately the court ruled against the encroacher, emphasizing that good faith requires a genuine belief that you are the rightful owner. You can't knowingly take possession of someone else's property and then later claim good faith.
So even though they met the time requirement, their lack of good faith was their downfall.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of that good faith element. It's not just about possessing something for a period of time. It's about doing so with a genuine belief that you have the right to do so.
This is full of twists and turns. Prescription isn't just this dry legal concept. It really shapes lives and resolves disputes. What about situations where the concept of time itself gets disrupted? Like during a war or a natural disaster. Does prescription still apply that?
That is a fantastic question, and it brings us to Article 1136 of the Civil Code, which states, "Possession in wartime when the civil courts are not open shall not be counted in favor of the adverse claimant."
Oh, so if there's a war or something that disrupts the courts, the clock for prescription stops. It's like a legal pause button.
Exactly. The law recognizes that during times of upheaval and uncertainty, it wouldn't be fair to penalize someone for not being able to assert their rights or defend their property. Think about the Philippines during World War II C3. With the Japanese occupation and the closure of courts, it would be unreasonable to expect people to maintain perfect legal compliance during those times.
It's like the law is saying, hey, there are bigger things going on right now. This provision seems really relevant in the Philippines.
Absolutely. Article 1136 is a testament to the resilience of Philippine law, recognizing that the pursuit of justice must be tempered by the realities of life's unpredictable circumstances.
Okay, this is blowing my mind. We've covered so much. The different types of prescription good faith, just titled The Impact of War and Extraordinary Events. We even touched on those fundamental rights that can never be extinguished by prescription. C3, are you feeling overwhelmed yet?
I hope not. We've only just scratched the surface. But I hope this exploration has given you a deeper appreciation for the intricate workings of prescription and its impact on property rights and legal claims.
Definitely. And I'm dying to hear more about those debt vanishing cases you mentioned earlier. It seems like time can erase more than just property boundaries. It can actually wipe out financial obligations. Let's get into that next.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about those debt vanishing cases. Time can actually erase financial obligations. It's like a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Well, not quite that simple. But you're right, the law does set time limits for enforcing different types of debts. It's all about extinctive prescription,
Okay.
where the right to collect a debt is extinguished if the creditor doesn't take action within a certain period, like a legal snooze button.
If you hit it for too long.
You might miss your chance.
So prescription impacts all sorts of claims, including debts. C3. Imagine owing someone money and realizing years have passed and they might not be able to collect anymore.
It happens.
What kind of debts are we talking about here? Are there different time limits for different types of debts?
Absolutely. The time limits or prescription periods vary depending on the nature of the debt and whether it's based on a written contract, an oral agreement, or an obligation imposed by law.
Mhm.
For example, Article 1144 of the Civil Code states that actions upon a written contract prescribe in 10 years.
10 years for written contracts. That seems like a reasonable amount of time.
It does.
For someone to collect what they're owed. What about debts that aren't based on a written contract? What if it's just like a verbal agreement or an implied obligation?
Those have shorter prescription periods. Article 1145 says, the following actions must be commenced within 6 years. 1. Upon an oral contract. 2. Upon a quasi-contract.
To 6 years.
A quasi-contract is a legal obligation that arises not from an agreement, but from something like unjust enrichment,
Okay.
where one person benefits unfairly at the expense of another.
So if you loan your friend some money without a written agreement, you better collect within 6 years,
Yeah, it can be risky.
especially if it's a lot of money.
It highlights the importance of clear documentation when
Yeah.
it comes to financial transactions.
Yeah.
A simple written agreement can make all the difference.
It's like a safety net.
Exactly, protecting you from those uncertainties of memory and time.
Okay, so 10 years for written contracts, 6 years for oral contracts and quasi-contracts.
Yeah.
Are there any even shorter time limits? Like what about all those unpaid parking tickets I've got lying around?
Well, there are certain actions that have even shorter prescription periods, like those dealing with injury or damage to property. Article 1146 says the following actions must be instituted within 4 years. 1. Upon an injury to the rights of the plaintiff. 2. Upon a quasi-delict.
4 years.
A quasi-delict is similar to a tort,
Oh, wait.
involving negligence or fault that causes damage.
So if someone hits your car and drives off, you've got 4 years to track them down
Like a legal countdown.
and get your money.
These shorter time limits reflect the idea that certain types of claims, especially those involving physical harm or property damage, should be resolved quickly to ensure fairness and prevent evidence from disappearing or memories from fading.
So it seems like the law is trying to be fair to everyone,
It is.
to protect creditors, but also just to like
Right.
wrap things up
Exactly.
and have some certainty.
Absolutely. Extinctive prescription encourages the timely resolution of debts and prevents those stale claims from popping up after years of being dormant. It's like a legal spring cleaning,
Oh, I like that.
clearing out those cobwebs and allowing both debtors and creditors to move forward.
So are there any debts that are completely immune to extinctive prescription? Like what about child support payments? Those shouldn't just disappear.
You're right. While the right to demand support itself never prescribes, meaning a child can always claim what they're owed, individual installments of support that are in arrears can actually prescribe after 10 years.
Oh, wow.
It's complex, but it highlights that even fundamental obligations have certain time limits for enforcement.
So even though you always have to pay child support,
Right.
there's a time limit to go after those specific payments.
Exactly.
Wow. It seems like prescription is everywhere. It's shaping property rights, financial obligations, and even family relationships.
It really does touch every corner of the legal landscape.
This deep dive has been amazing.
It has.
It really shows that prescription isn't just this boring legal thing.
Yeah.
It's a real tool for life.
It's about understanding prescription, not just as a concept, but as something practical that you can use.
Absolutely. C3. Whether you're dealing with inheritance, a debt dispute, or anything legal, remember that time matters. And this prescription thing can be a big deal. It can really impact the outcome.
It's a reminder to be proactive, to get legal advice, and always be mindful of time.
This has been an incredible journey through Philippine prescription law.
It has been.
We've explored the types, the requirements, and even those weird situations where the clock pauses or some rights are just immune to time.
We've seen how prescription plays out in real life,
Good
shaping
point.
ownership, erasing those debts, and even resolving family issues. It's a testament to how dynamic the law really is.
It is C3. We hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of prescription and how important it can be. Remember, time is of the essence, and knowing this stuff can make all the difference.